Well, now, this is interesting. Uh, I have absolutely no idea why I don't have a camera, and I can't figure out what's going on here, so we'll just talk this way through, I guess. I don't know what this is all about. Sorry, guys. So it's because I've tried this about 2 or 3 times, and it still doesn't come up with video, and I have no clue why. Anyway, moving right along. I'll have to think about this. This is functional fixedness. Anyway, let's just stop this and go on to the conversation about functional fixedness. Has anybody ever asked, and probably somebody somewhere along the line, maybe when you were in school or something, somebody has said something to you or to a group, usually not to a single person, but they've said something like, "How can you think of 25 ways to use a brick?" At which point most people kind of look at the question, think, "What?" And then you spend some time trying to figure it out, and you might get 5 or 6 items, and that's about it. Somebody in the group maybe gets 15, maybe, perhaps, and everybody says, "Oh, that's cool." If you've ever had anything like this, the odds are that somebody is trying to display or discuss the concept of functional fixedness. What this really means is that when we learn something has a specific task or chore, that's the way we see it. So in the case of a brick, for most of us in the Western society, we will tend to see brick buildings. And so when we see bricks, we tend to think in terms of being something that fits into building a building. Now, if you're like 3 or 4, maybe 5, and you've lived in a community which had maybe wood houses or maybe cinder block, but not specifically red brick, little children might be able to go to town on this particular exercise because they wouldn't associate bricks with building homes. We, as adults in this particular society, have gotten used to the idea that a brick goes into a building, it builds a wall, it builds, that kind of thing, so that we get fixed on the concept that the brick only has one function. Or two, depending on how you want to look at it. If you want to say build houses, that's one function. If you want to say build walls, that's another function. But basically, we're looking at the concept if it's a building block, so to speak. Now, if we went to children, even adults in a country that was, say, didn't have brick buildings for whatever reason, maybe in the middle of the Amazon or something, and they lived in that's or something that wasn't quite as heat keeping as a brick building might be, even adults would come up with a way of coming up with a lot of reasons to fix or use bricks because they wouldn't be limited just to the concept of fixing or building buildings or walls. Does this make sense? We do things in other ways that basically when you see an item, um, and somebody says, "What can you do with it?" If we associate it with something that we've seen throughout our lives, that's about the only way we tend to see it. And we can't see any other particular option. Now, if some of you have ever watched the television show MacGyver, this was a television show, as far as I know, it's not on anymore. Well, it might be on someplace. Somebody may be seeing reruns or something like that. But anyway, in which MacGyver was somebody who was able to pretty much do just about anything in the world, save the world for the democracy with a hairpin and a piece of chewing gum. Because his whole concept was able to take a look at things in a different way and use them in ways to solve the problem of whatever it happened to be for that particular episode. Most of us found that fascinating because we don't think that way. So what we do is we're limited to the ways we look at objects because we're so used to seeing them in the way they tend to be in our environment. So if you use a spoon as a spoon, you're only going to see a spoon as a spoon, and you're not going to be able to see it in any other way other than a spoon, is what it boils down to. Now, is this a problem? Depends on what you consider a problem. Because if you run into a problem, say MacGyver, which let's start that one again, which isn't really a major issue, but let's just say some of the people who are like in Texas or different places in which they've been flooded or they've got tornadoes and they've got to make do with different things and they're trying to figure out how to do something, create a building or create shelter or something. They've got to start looking at things in a brand new way and they may be a little limited because all they do is they see things as they're used to seeing them. So they see things, I'm not sure because I'm being functionally fixed on this particular item, but let's just say they've got a bunch of spoons, they're going to see them as spoons. They're not going to see them as any other way to do something with it. They may be, depending on the material the spoon's made of, a way of connecting two electrical items to produce electricity because they could produce the current if the spoons are made of the correct material. So what I'm saying is when you get into a situation in which you need to be creative about a solution, it becomes really difficult because you just see the things around you as the way you've always seen them. Now, where this comes in with the problem with reading and to some degree learning is because when we're reading material or we're seeing history or anything else like that, we read information in the way we're used to seeing it and reading about things the way we're used to. So if you're reading, and sometimes this is what causes a problem with, say, like algebra or math problems, because it's starting to ask us to do things that we're not used to seeing, kind of like when you get those algebra word problems and once you've got two boats going to each other, or, the infamous, if one train leaves a station and the other train leaves the opposite station, when do they crash kind of thing. Our minds basically just don't work on the idea that these two trains are going to go crash kind of thing. Now, the problem is not set up that way. But we see that in our heads when we're looking at that, and we find it difficult to look for a solution to that because we're, in a sense, fixed on the idea that we just don't need to look at it this way, if that makes sense. Or we have something that we're reading and we're trying to read something in a different historical period, and we're saying, why would people do something like that? And we forget that people at that particular period didn't have some of the things we've got today. For some of you who are, say, less than 30, the idea of trying to think in terms of no cell phones and relatively, the televisions that you see today and everything else like that is just, you can't think about it that way because you're just not used to it. So that when you do see some things or somebody does have a problem with something, say your grandparents or something like that, and they can't manage to do something, or on the other hand, they do something and you're looking at them because they're weird because you're saying, why would they do something like that? They're putting things together based on their specific set of functional fixedness because they're going to see certain things in a way because that's the way they learn to use them. You didn't learn to use them that way, so you don't see them that way. So you see what that your grandparents are possibly doing is really weird. They're looking at what you do is really weird because you're not looking at the usage of those particular pieces of material in the same way because you become fixed in different points. Does this make sense? I hope. Um, so that where it comes in a problem, to go back, hopefully to get back on track, if I haven't totally lost you, is when you're reading things and sometimes when you're reading material that gets confusing, especially if you don't have pictures to show you what's going on. You read the material about a situation and your mind is going to a situation that is familiar to you, which may not be what's being described in the reading, because they may be talking about the reading, may be talking about something that is different from what you know, but you're going to put the mental image into your head of what you know. And so the reading is not going to make sense to you because the picture in your head is not typical of the picture that's being depicted in the reading. Does that make sense? So when you're trying to do something new or look at something from a different perspective or look at somebody from a different culture or a different age group or different country, and you're not communicating, most likely part of the problem is going to be the functional fixedness because you're used to certain things and certain words being in a particular way according to the way you have learned them. And it doesn't work in your head anyway, the way somebody else is using it because they've got a different functional fixedness, if you will. Say that three times real fast. It gets difficult. Trust me on this. So just be aware of the fact that sometimes when you're reading something or you're looking at something or you're talking to somebody and you're not getting anywhere, you might be having some definitions, if you will, that you're making or assumptions about what you're listening to or what you're reading that's blocking you because those are the way you've learned to use those terms. And the speaker or the writer of the material may be thinking in terms of different terms, so the two of you aren't communicating, and that may be why the material is difficult. or why you can't communicate. In many cases, it's kind of like the idea of, quote, an adolescent who says, clean room. The definition of what clean is to a parent and to a teenager are not going to be the same thing. The word's the same, and it's got the same basic meaning, but each person has a slightly different interpretation of what clean means. And so if they just say, go clean your room, one's going to be happy, one's not going to be happy in more cases than not, because the definition of clean is not clear. That could be, in a sense, a minor example of functional fixedness. You could also say something about a new car. What does new mean? Well, this is not quite functional fixedness, but hopefully you get to see what I'm talking about when I say that the way you use your terms may be misunderstood because somebody else is not using that same particular term or have that same meaning to go with that particular term. I'm getting really distraught not being able to see the picture, but hopefully my words are coming through, and we'll see what I can do about finding a camera for this. And let me know if this came through and if it was terribly annoying. But hopefully this made sense today, and we will chat with you later. Okay, bye.